Buenos días, ¿cómo están? Buenos días a todas y a todas, a todos y a
Good
todas.
morning to all, to each and every one of you. I am Laura Sommer. I am a fellow from the Knight Center for Journalism as well as the ICFJ. I am very excited and thrilled that so many more people are joining our master classes on Disarming Disinformation, sponsored by both the ICFJ and the Knight Center for Journalism in the Americas. This is the second day of our program, and we will continue offering you various other opportunities for support as well as for training and education. The purpose of this particular program, as you know, is to investigate those who pay for disinformation or misinformation in the Americas, focused specifically. For those of you who joined us yesterday in the master classes offered by Craig and Patricia, if you have not completed your survey, let me remind you that we need you to do that. You have received an email with a survey for the last class with a QR code, and you will also see in the chat the link for those evaluations. Thank you for those of you who already did that. But some of you still haven't submitted your evaluation or your survey for feedback on those two presentations. We want to make sure that our programs are tailored to meet your needs. Those of you who joined us for the master classes yesterday and are joining us again today, we want to make sure you are aware that you can receive, you will have a right to receive a certificate. And this will all make you eligible for what we've announced as the Research-a-thon or Investigaton to be done in April of next year. There will be more details on how to submit your application. There is a selection process. Not all 250 of you would be able to participate in that, but there will be a selection process. It's a closer number to 20 out of the 200. So as I say, there's a selection process and an application process. You will also receive by email, the next steps for what we hope you include in your proposal speech or your proposal presentation. Craig and Patricia both said that they are very enthusiastically expecting and looking forward to receiving your proposals. In many cases, they will be working with you, mentoring you for that. When I was asked to participate, I think this is the dream, certainly mine and that of many others, to be able to have the means and have the opportunity to participate in a program like this, where we are able to investigate and find, ferret out those who are economically invested in these disinformation and misinformation campaigns. We'll also have an opportunity for those of you who are interested. We'll have an event in February to work with you, to support you with what you need for those presentation speeches. So be attentive to the emails that we'll be sending you. The event in January will be an online event explaining what we need for you to submit a proposal and an application. Obviously, this isn't mandatory. It's up to you if you wish to participate and think it's a good idea. I've also been asked as another vertical program. There's also a research component for the misinformation vertical at the ICFJ. Be attentive, those of you who are journalists and are interested in experimenting with different formats. There'll be another call for support. That's going to be called the viral track. And you'll be challenged, asked to present a pitch on how your own work can extend. I think all of these are mails that you'll receive from Juan Torres. I think those are all of the announcements I've been entrusted with, and housekeeping issues. Remember, our idea is for you to participate in your own language, in the language you feel most comfortable in, of the ones offered, so you can select in the globe or world icon or dots if you're on a tablet, a Mac tablet. You can select interpretation, simultaneous interpretation into Spanish, English, or Portuguese. I will be asking my questions and I will be participating in Spanish. Our first speaker is Claire Wardle, who will speak in English, and then Janina, the second speaker, in Spanish. To close out then these announcers, we'll do what we did yesterday before presenting Claire Wardle, who I myself have an enormous debt with, because so much of what I know, I learned from her. There were two links that a participant asked for of Patricia Campos Melo, one of our speakers. If the team has not already copied those, they will be added to the chat for a tool. Patricia did follow through with that request and has sent the links, and we will share them on the webinar chat today. As Patricia said, these are two tools that are no longer active, but you can still have access to them. All right, that's all I wanted to share with you for, and I'll ask for the camera to now spotlight Claire so that she can join me here. Claire is a co-founder. There we go. I can see you now, Claire. Thank you. Claire is a co-founder and co-director of the Information Futures Lab, and she is a professor of clinical practice at the Brown University School of Public Health in the United States. She's worked previously, many of you may know her or be familiar with her work. She created the organization First Draft, a nonprofit that started in 2015, and the purpose there was to study the ecosystem, the disorder in the information ecosystem. And many of the people on this event that work on fact-checking were very eager to read her publications, read the material that came out of that. So thank you, Claire, for having opened that path for many of us as well. Thank you for joining us today. And I know our audience will be very excited to hear from you today. Before I move off the podium here, if you will, I have just a few questions to get to know you better. All right? Yes, okay. The question was mountain or beach, Claire?
Oh, beach.
Okay. Okay, perfect. Dog or cat?
Dog, and my dog's right there, and he might make an appearance at some point.
Okay, we want to know the name then.
Dougal.
Okay, okay.
Dougal.
Okay, okay. Your favorite meal?
Oh, I live in America. It's a good burger.
Vivo en Estados Unidos, una buena hamburguesa. Bueno. Ciudad preferida en las Américas, en el continente de norte, sur o Centroamérica. Tengo que decir Buenos Aires porque estoy hablando contigo.
But it's also true, it's stunning.
pero bueno, hay otros. Y finalmente, ¿quién va a ganar la Copa de Fútbol? ¿Quién va a ganar el Mundial?
I'm from England, but it will
Yo
not
soy
be
inglesa,
the English
pero
team.
no va a ser la selección de Inglaterra.
So after I spent a lot of time in Brazil because we did
Después
a
de
big
pasar
project in
mucho
Brazil, so
tiempo
I'm
en
going to say
Brasil,
Brazil.
porque hicimos ese enorme proyecto en Brasil, voy a decir Brasil. Yo soy argentina, no me gusta tu respuesta, pero bueno, es tu respuesta. Está
We're
bien.
still angry about Maradona's hand. I can't say Argentina.
Todavía estamos enojados con eso de la mano de Maradona. Sí, tienes razón, tienes razón. Siendo verificadora, fact checker, tengo que admitir que tienes razón por lo de la mano de Maradona. Vamos a escucharte ahora. Gracias de nuevo, Claire. Y te doy la palabra. Tienes 45 minutos para esta presentación tuya. Después habrá una oportunidad para preguntas y respuestas.
Thank you very much, Lara. And thank you to everybody for being here. It's unbelievable to see everybody saying hello from Bogota, Sao Paulo. It really is remarkable. So thank you very much for being here. And I'm going to start by saying many of you are the experts. I feel embarrassed to be the one that's talking to you. You live in these countries. You are watching disinformation harming your countries. And so I have to say, I'm sorry that I'm speaking in English. It's strange to be talking to you about disinformation in your locations. But my hope is that I can talk a little bit about some of the trends that we see as people who are based in the US and work in Europe. And you might think, oh, that's helped me think about my own country. But I'm very aware that on some of these issues, I'm not the expert. Secondly, I have an amazing team that do amazing work. I don't do as much of this work as I used to, so I will not be as technical as Craig was yesterday or Patricia. But again, I hope to show you some examples that might be an inspiration for your own work. So I just want to say that at the top, that I'm really excited to be here. I'm really excited to have the chance, hopefully, to work with some of you. But I'm also very aware of what I don't know. So I'll start with that. But I do have a presentation, and I'm going to pull that up. And hopefully there will be some things here that are interesting for you or resonate for you or spark a research question. And that's the whole purpose of today. So let's get started. We have 50 minutes. So I'm going to start a little bit about who I am. I'm then going to talk about definitions and why they matter, because we can't study something unless we have a language to describe that. Then I'm going to talk about the trends that we saw in the pandemic. Then I'm going to talk about what I think is missing from the investigations that I see. And I know that this program is focused on the financial aspect, and Craig did an amazing job yesterday talking about some of these things. But I'm also going to talk more generally about ways that we see influence play out online. Then I'm going to show 3 case studies and finish with some key learnings. So very quickly, I got into this in 2008 when I did a report for the BBC who said, the audience is sending us things over email and text, and we don't know what's true or not. So this question of what's true on the internet has become now the thing that we all care about. But in 2009, and actually today's sad, this might be the end of Twitter this weekend. It's very sad to see, who knows? But I think only 10% of Twitter employees said that they wanted to stay. But back in January 2009, this image of passengers on the plane when the plane landed in the Hudson River, that was just over 10 years ago. And many journalists didn't even know what Twitter was. And the BBC said, can you come and help train our journalists? So this is still very, very new, and it's how I got into this space. And as Lara said, in 2015, I helped co-found First Draft. And I'm going to talk a lot today about things that we did at First Draft, resources that are still on the site, lots of links that I'm going to share today are still on the First Draft site. And even though our work has moved to Brown University, all of these links will still remain available on First Draft. The Internet Archive is keeping the site going. Thank you, Internet Archive. So one of the early projects we did was actually in partnership with some academics in London, and it was this field guide to fake news, because at the time, the academic said, there's all this investigation that people can do online, but they don't necessarily know how to do it. And they basically published a guide full of recipes. Take me to the field guide. And that's one of the things I want to talk about today, is that for some of you, you might not be computational journalists, but you want to know how you can do this effectively. Oh, now I can't find it. Here we go. You don't necessarily have the skills to run Python scripts and other things, and you're getting amazing education here. But these kind of recipes, let me find them. All sorts of things that you can do, how to look at tracker signatures, studying political memes, mapping troll-like practices. There's some great resources out there which allow you to use pretty basic software to do this without having to be an expert in some of these things. So when we did that work, I felt really excited about how we could teach different people who aren't necessarily computational. So I'm going to talk a lot about digital recipes in this class. But I also want to say one of the projects I'm most proud of was Comprover, that we ran in Brazil. We started it in 2018 around the election, and it's still going with over 40 newsrooms collaborating. And we did great work around that election and continue to do. But one of the things I learned during that project is that we had a tip line. And you heard from Patricia yesterday, the power of WhatsApp. And we had over 30,000 messages from the audience via WhatsApp that gave us a really interesting take on disinformation in Brazil. But actually, when we cross-referenced it with some academics who were lurking in WhatsApp groups, they were finding some of the worst WhatsApp groups and finding information. The two data sets were quite different. And that's a really important question for us to consider when we do these investigations. When we're asking for tips from the audience, is it representative of everything that's out there? And that's particularly the challenge with WhatsApp. So again, just wanted to, you had a great lecture yesterday about WhatsApp, but it's the ongoing challenge, both ethically, should we be spending time in these groups? And if we have tip lines, does that mean we're just getting the stuff from people who already care about disinformation, but we're not seeing all of the disinformation that's circulating? We also did a couple of case studies in the spring of 2019 on vaccines. And we did one in the Philippines when we looked at the rollout of a new vaccine called Dengvaxia that was meant to fight dengue fever. And the rollout was handled so badly that there was huge amounts of conspiracy circulating in the country, and trust in the government declined significantly. And this was before COVID. And we did that by basically studying Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, but it was very qualitative. It was my team of researchers using keywords and just looking for examples. And just from that, finding really interesting things. But we didn't have a huge data set, but it was, we could map and track over 3 years how this distrust was growing to see who was starting it, where it was flowing. So again, even if you don't feel confident in scraping large data sets, you can still learn a great deal from qualitatively spending time in these spaces. We also did a case study in Pakistan where there was a video that suggested that there was a video of children being vaccinated and then fainting. It was completely staged. No child was hurt, but because it looked terrifying, the video spread throughout the country in 3 days. And within 3 days, clinics were being burnt down, doctors were being hurt. It was a terrible situation. And in fact, trust in the polio vaccine is still very, very low in Pakistan. So the Dengvaxia case study was over 3 years. This one was over 3 days, but taught us the difference between acute versus chronic disinformation, those that happen around an emergency versus low-level disinformation campaigns that can take a long time to come to fruition. So we didn't actually study the financial elements of either of those, but with any kind of campaign, there's almost always some kind of financial connection to even who's funding these kind of campaigns, even if it's not directly to make money, who is funding the campaign to do this in the first place. And so in March of 2021, we published this, which was a new updated version of that field guide with lots of different digital investigation recipes. So we have 7 different recipes. And then for each recipe, we did an analysis to show how to take that recipe and apply it in the real world. So there's all how to investigate ad trackers with Gephi and DMI tracker tool. And then we looked at fringe community feeds on Russia Today coverage, YouTube and search engine scrapers, vaccine infertility claims on YouTube was the story we wrote off the back of that. So if there's one link that you should bookmark, it's this one, because it's full of really interesting examples, how 4chan and 8kun users rely on YouTube videos to spread climate change denialism. 4cat is a way it's collecting tweets in real time. Who knows what's going to happen after Elon Musk, how to study conspiracy memes on Instagram. So I just want to say, even though I might not be today giving you lots of this teaching here, this link will has all sorts of things that hopefully there'll be things in there that really interest you. So I now lead the Information Futures Lab at Brown University, where we're trying to connect practitioners like yourselves, many of whom are doing some of the best work in this space, and connecting you to researchers who are doing really important work to create an evidence base, but they're sometimes disconnected to people on the front lines doing this work every day. So that's the hope of the lab, but most of First Draft's work is continuing. And so it's really exciting to be able to continue this work. Okay, so I'm going to start by talking a little bit about definitions, which anybody who knows me knows that I still am a bit of a stickler. I don't know what the word is in Spanish, but a pedant for using the right language. And back in 2017, we created the 7 types of mis and disinformation to try and help people understand the landscape. And still, this is the case of these 7 categories. The biggest category is this middle one, false context, when genuine content is shared with false contextual information. So you might have seen this week the story that was published in Newsweek talking about the 15,000 protesters in Iran and the fact that Iran wanted to take stronger action against them, and mentioned that some might be executed. But people connected the 15,000 to the word execution, and all of a sudden Justin Trudeau and celebrities were saying, oh my goodness, 15,000 Iranian protesters are going to be executed. Again, this was a genuine article from Newsweek, but the context got warped. So when you're doing the investigations, be aware that we see fewer outright falsehoods, and we see a lot of what we call gray speech, genuine content, but the context has been weaponized. And so that's the challenge for us doing these kind of investigations. Is it's harder. We see fewer bot networks now. We see fewer outright falsehoods. We see more of this gray speech. And that's because as the social media platforms have become stronger at taking action against outright falsehoods, bad actors have had to change their tactics and have had to move into more of this gray space where there is not regulation, there are not platform policies, content moderation cannot work because it's legal speech. So that's the challenge when we're doing this work, is trying to say, how do we come up with our guidelines and definitions for what we say disinformation is? Because if we don't get the categories right, we can't study it. And so I just want to really stress the need for that at the top. And so this is an example I use a lot in training. It's from 2018 in London, and we had a terrorist attack on Westminster Bridge. Now, this is a genuine image. The text says, Muslim woman pays no mind to the terror attack, casually walks by a dying man while checking phone. Hashtag pray for London, hashtag Westminster, hashtag ban Islam. So this is Islamophobic tweet, I would argue, is an example of hate speech. However, there's very little that a platform could do at this stage based on the content, because in particularly the context of the US, this is protected speech. There's nothing you can do about it. But the woman, when she was interviewed, said, yes, I was on the phone to my husband. I was terrified and I wasn't looking at the woman out of respect. So this is a genuine image. I do not like the text, but it doesn't break any laws. So for platforms, there's nothing they can do about it. But what they could do was they found out that this account, Texas Lone Star, was actually a Russian bot. So this was 2018. We had many more bot accounts then. And so platforms can take action based on behavior and source. It's quite difficult for them to take action on content. But again, when you are doing your investigations, you can define what it is that you want to study. So you might argue that you are going to study anything that includes hashtags or text that you are defining as Islamophobic or as racist, but you have to be clear up front in your investigation of what you're studying, because the platform policies really don't give us anything to play with. So in 2017, I wrote this report, Information Disorder, and this was the original Venn diagram. We talked about the difference between mis, dis, and malinformation. Disinformation being deliberately false information created to cause harm. This might be Russian interference in the US election. That's different to misinformation, which is when my mum shares it, she doesn't realize that it's false, and she doesn't mean any harm. So of course, this program is called Disarming Disinformation. And so the question is, how do we find the relatively small number of people who are creating disinformation? Because actually they're small in number. The problem that we have is misinformation, because many people are not able to recognize it as misleading and they share it. But I want to come to this third category, which is malinformation, which is genuine content that's shared to cause harm. And we are seeing more of this. So one example would be revenge porn. That is genuine content, but it's the making public of that content that means that it is it's causing harm. But actually in the US midterm elections recently, we saw a lot of malinformation, which was genuine videos of, at the ballot box that just showed the messiness of democracy. So it might be that a machine stopped working for 5 minutes. People would film that and then share it and say it's election fraud. But that was genuine information taking advantage of existing divisions and polarization in the country and existing narratives about the fact that you can't trust the democratic process. So I want to make us think too about, as these tactics are evolving, we're seeing more of this malinformation, which is genuine content, but designed to be shared to cause harm because it's taking advantage of existing divisions and existing worldviews. So since doing this Venn diagram, I kind of keep coming back to it to say, here's Elaine. Now, she is an anti-vaxxer. I took this from Instagram in 2019. But the thing is, Elaine isn't a passive recipient of misinformation. She actually, her t-shirt says informed. She spends all day reading academic studies about vaccines. She believes that she's the one who's preventing harm. So I increasingly am thinking about our traditional view of misinformation, which is my mom mistakenly sharing something. That's not Elaine. Elaine is, she absolutely believes that the information is true, and she believes that she's preventing harm. So again, I'm putting this out here because we have to keep thinking about how this space is evolving. And so I increasingly think about, on a spectrum, the content, how accurate or inaccurate is it? And then the person's belief in the accuracy of the content, how accurate or inaccurate is the person's belief. And then finally, the person's intention to cause harm by sharing. So somebody like Elaine or the people that stormed the Capitol on January 6th, they thought that they were preserving democracy. They thought they were saving the Constitution. So I'm putting all of this out there to say, this isn't always as easy as we used to think it was in 2016. The tactics are evolving, the landscape is evolving. And so when we do these investigations, we have to be aware of those shifts in our information ecosystem. And so now my new definition of misinformation is the sharing of false or misleading content because of a belief that it will help either A, by people who did not check the veracity, my mum, or by people who believe deeply that the information is true. So again, we have to keep evolving the way that we understand this space because it continues to change. So in terms of trends we saw during the pandemic, the anti-COVID vaccine community had a very strong foundation to work with. So anti-vaxxers didn't just emerge in 2020. They have been around for 20 years, if not longer. And so they had this very strong base to begin with. So this meme is from 2019. So when you are studying anti-vax communities, which are absolutely many of them driven by those who are trying to make money, we have to understand and go right back to where these communities were forming. We need to go back and understand who these nodes, these super spreaders were before COVID. We can't just think about it now because we have to recognize that the reason it's been so successful during this pandemic was because of the many, many, many years of building out a foundation, both online and offline, that then got activated basically on steroids during the pandemic. As I said, we saw far fewer outright falsehoods and more content that just skirts content moderation policies. So someone say coronavirus, one of the biggest tactics we now see is people just asking questions. I'm just asking the question about hydroxychloroquine. So those kind of asking questions is a known tactic of disinformation agents because there's nothing that platforms can do about just asking questions. And the reason that people just ask questions is that they are seeding search queries, keywords, hoping that the audience will then go to Google and find the answers. So some of the best research is actually studying search engine results. Because if I search for vaccines, I get millions and millions of hits, but the top page is pretty good because Google or YouTube have cleaned up the results. If I put in vaccines, hydroxychloroquine, gold, I'm just making up, but the more keywords I give, the fewer Google results I get. And the more that I put the rumor keywords in, the more I get more conspiratorial content. So if you listen to talk radio hosts, they will often say, when you get home, Google this, and they give you search queries because they know that those search queries are going to take you to the results that they want you to find. So I would love to see many, many, many more investigations about search query results, because conspiracy theorists absolutely take advantage of those voids, of those spaces on Google, that quality information has yet to be created. So yeah, to me, that's a really exciting space. Conspiracy content is moving from the fringes to the mainstream. So here are just some Facebook groups just about 5G from Australia, California, huge numbers of members in these Facebook groups. Still a really, really rich space to do investigations around, hugely large active groups that, again, harder to find, but once you find them, once you join them, all sorts of things being shared. And so to me, it's something like 5G, the conspiracy that phone towers were causing COVID. In my country, in the UK, people were burning down phone telephone poles. I mean, it really moved from the internet to real world harm. You know this, but visual mimetic memes, or memes, that was my favorite learning when I went to South America. Visuals, mimetic and video content is getting more prevalent and influential, but much more difficult to monitor and track. So TikTok is an absolute gold mine, but it's very, very, very difficult to monitor, as you know, and very difficult to monitor at scale, because what I see in my feed, mostly puppy videos, is different to people who are on QAnon TikTok, is different to people who are really obsessed with election denial, other people who are really, really obsessed with celebrities. So trying to get a sense of what's going viral on TikTok is very hard. And unless you have many, many, many burner phones running against different algorithmic topics, very difficult. And as we maybe saw, you may remember in May 2020, a very popular documentary called Plandemic. If you look at it, it looks like a very slick Netflix video. So the other thing is false content or disinformation is becoming slicker. It looks more professional because our brains rely on heuristics, mental shortcuts. And so the heuristic of something that looks really professional, we're more likely to trust it, versus a local news site, which you click on it and there's pop-up ads. It's really hard to read. There's they want you to pay. Actually, quality information is actually uglier than, disinformation, which is designed to be shared and is designed to look professional. Misinformation and hate speech continue to intersect. People took advantage of racial divisions and xenophobia. That continues. I would love to see more investigations into that. We tend to see them as like people study hate speech or they study misinformation, and we need to be much, much better at understanding the way that they play off each other. And you know this because you all live in Latin America, but closed messaging apps increasingly a problem. And whilst we talk a lot about WhatsApp, really interesting to understand, in Ukraine right now, Telegram is very popular, but also Viber, Kakao Talk in South Korea, obviously WeChat, Line is very popular in Thailand. So there's a lot of really interesting space here to understand growing platforms that we might not be previously studying. The role of the news media continues to concern me. So the way that first-person stories get amplified by the news media, who, if you watch the whole thing, it's pretty responsible. But if I search for on YouTube vaccine injury, which is the keyword that anti-vaxxers use to describe vaccine side effects, they call it vaccine injury. So if I search that on YouTube, these are the 3 top results. These are very serious news outlets telling the story, the first person story. But if I'm looking for evidence of vaccine injury, I have this on YouTube. And so the role of the news media, we have to recognize that. And in fact, the first quarter of 2021 on Facebook, the most shared piece of misinformation was this headline from the Chicago Tribune: a healthy doctor died 2 weeks after getting the vaccine. CDC is investigating why. Now, the story was actually quite responsible and explained that the doctor had a pre-existing condition, but the damage was done and this was spread very, very, very widely. So we also have to understand, again, the whole information ecosystem and the way that anti-vax communities rely on trusted sources like the news media or like academic articles. Anything that does their work for them, they then jump on and push it out. So that's another really interesting area for investigation, understanding the ways in which disinformation agents take advantage of trusted information sources. There's a bigger question here around the need for journalism and public health professionals and scientists to be better at communicating in a weaponized information environment, but we have to understand all of these dynamics. And also, conspiracy theories take advantage of trusted spaces to push their own content in comments or replies. So this is an example from a local news Facebook page saying, from the beginning of the pandemic, tell us, Do you think people should eventually show documentation that they've had the COVID vaccine? The comments here were full of conspiracy theorists saying, no, vaccine passports are terrible. Join us here. Come to this website. We're going to tell you more. So we also have to think about comments as a place to do investigations. They are often not studied, but they are used as a recruitment space for disinformation agents who are trying to find people and to bring them over to their spaces, their websites, their communities. And you know this, disinformation is borderless. I've never seen anything like I saw during the pandemic of the same rumors, the same memes jumping from country to country to country to country. And those of us who study it are often funded to just study our country or our language. And so we don't have a really good sense of how disinformation flows across the globe, because we, the good guys, excuse my language, but we are not funded or organized enough to be able to do those kind of analyses. So anything you can do that recognizes and studies cross-border flows and cross-language flows is just exactly what we need. So some of the things that, again, we need to be better at, because I think it gets forgotten in conversations. So this is a really important one, is that we tend to study the atoms of content. We study this YouTube video, this Facebook post, this tweet. That's how we understand this. But we have to be better at understanding the ways in which those individual atoms make up narratives. And narratives are the way that people make sense of the world. But it's harder to study narratives. And so we end up playing whack-a-mole with the individual examples, as opposed to understanding how it all fits together. So this is a really important learning for this lecture, is that we need to be better at studying and making sense of narratives. And so I'm going to talk as one of the case studies about a piece of research we did about vaccine narratives. And we pulled down 20 million posts from Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube and Facebook. And we then, from all of that content, came up with this typology of 6 narratives that were related to vaccines. So this is how people were talking about the vaccines: development, provision, and access, safety, efficacy, and necessity, political and economic motives, conspiracy theories, liberty and freedom, morality and religion. And I'm going to talk more about this later, but I showed this slide to somebody at the CDC, the Center for Disease Control in the US, and they said, well, the only one of these 6 that we could ever put information out about is the safety and efficacy of vaccines. We couldn't talk about any of these other things. So that's what we have to understand, is how do we respond to the actual ways that people were talking about vaccines? Lots of people, not just disinformation agents, were obsessed with some of these other ways of thinking about the vaccine, like liberty and freedom, which was the #1 way that the English language posts were talking about it. I mean, I live in America. They love their freedom in America. And so that was the #1 narrative. It wasn't about, is the vaccine safe? It's, who's going to force me to have a vaccine? And so, again, we have to understand the actual ways people are talking about it and taking advantage of those narratives. The biggest problem is the longitudinal impact of this gray speech. So I see every day low-level, misogynistic, racist, xenophobic, conspiratorial content that's like a drip. Any one of you that has teenagers, they see this content, none of which the platforms are going to take down. And individually, none of them will do harm, but collectively, they are doing harm. So how do we investigate over time? And an amazing documentary that the New York Times created in 2018 is called Operation Infection. And in it, they found footage of Russian spies from the 1980s. And one of the spies says, it's like drops of water on a rock. No individual drop of water can cause any harm, but over years, you can splinter a rock into thousands of pieces. And they said, that's what we're trying to do with the US. And I would argue in 2022, they've done quite a good job because this society is splintered into 1,000 pieces. But that's what disinformation is. And when we focus on the worst of the worst, we're missing the low-level content that's not breaking any policies, that's gray speech, but over time is potentially causing harm. We also, I think, focus too much on the worst kind. The Bill Gates is putting microchips into vaccines. That's what journalists want to focus on, the crazy, the bizarre, the conspiratorial. But actually, we need to think about the full information supply chain and what we call data deficits, which is the point in the information supply chain when people have questions, but they're not being answered. So, for example, somebody saying, what is mRNA? Like, as you know, Pfizer and Moderna, their vaccines used mRNA, but people are like, I don't know what it is. Because we didn't do a good enough job of explaining that, it allowed the conspiracy theorists to convince many people that it was going to change their DNA because we didn't get there quick enough. Somebody saying, can the vaccine cause infertility? Now, as the scientists are saying, we don't have enough data, we can't tell you that yet, it causes a vacuum, and that vacuum gets filled by conspiracy theorists who are like, yeah, here's a preprint that is concerning, or here's a story of my sister who got the vaccine and now she can't get pregnant. So we have to think about this long information supply chain, and I would argue we need to be better at understanding these earlier parts, because that's what conspiracy theorists and disinformation agents are taking advantage of. So again, when you're thinking about your investigations, don't just focus on the end point. Think about how some of this is being taken advantage of earlier in the supply chain. And you know this, but we have been all studying Twitter because it's easiest, because Twitter has given better access to us. But that means almost everything we know is based on Twitter. God knows what's going to happen now that Elon Musk is basically tearing it down. But we are not studying, and these might not be as popular in all of your countries, but Twitch, Discord, books, Amazon Books, Telegram, Snapchat, TikTok, YouTube even. We know how popular YouTube is, but because it's hard to study, we don't really study it. So what we have to be better at is studying these platforms. And we also have to try and study cross-platform spread. So how does it jump from, from Telegram to Twitch to YouTube? It's all very, very, very hard. I'm not denying that. But the problem is we have so little understanding of these ecosystems because we're just studying Twitter. And in the US, again, it might be different in your countries, but we now have these alternative kind of platforms that are designed to have less content moderation. So we see more of these emerging, or like next door, we see hyper-local platforms emerging. So how do we study when the ecosystem is getting larger and more complex? So not only are we needing to study more of these different platforms, we also have to be aware of these newer platforms that are emerging around the edges. We have almost no mechanisms for tracking or analyzing off-platform and media spread. So I know it's easier to just think of disinformation as an online problem, but the biggest space I see is trying to understand how it's moving from online to offline. And this was at the beginning of the pandemic. This was a leaflet that was put in many people's mailboxes in Los Angeles. It's an example of imposter content. It uses the WHO logo, the CDC. How do we think about pamphlets, posters, leaflets? How do we understand what people are preaching on a Sunday? There's real issues around, unfortunately, in Latin America, Catholic priests actually using YouTube and other things to amplify what they're saying in their churches. Religion is a key element of so much of this, and the way that it moves from across the border and back again through diaspora communities. So I always trying to think about ways to connect online to offline spaces. And as I said, information flows mirror diaspora flows, but we tend to study and respond to these challenges by nation state or language. which really misses so much of what's going on here. We had a problem with a measles outbreak in spring 2019 among Somali diaspora communities that were all connected on WhatsApp. So we had an outbreak in Minnesota, an outbreak in Denmark, and an outbreak in Somalia. So to me, how do we track and understand those things as well? And I have to talk about Johnny Depp and Amber Heard, because there was a whole host of influence operations happening around that court case, but nobody was going to fund me to study a celebrity court case. But disinformation agents saw the opportunity to harvest data, to push particular narratives. So disinformation agents, they don't sit in silos. That's not, oh, I'm an anti-vaxxer, I'm an election denier. They are connected and they are seizing opportunities to push different content to emphasize existing divisions in society. So I just all the time keep saying we need to stop thinking in our disciplines or across subjects, because the other side absolutely doesn't. So what we should be studying, at the moment, we know really very little about how much disinformation is out there and what impact it's having. The two biggest questions: how much is there? What harm is it having? And almost everything we do know is based around research done in the US, research done on Twitter, and mostly research done with undergraduate students. So it's astonishing to me that in 2022, we still have so little knowledge of this. And I know this is because the platforms have refused to share data with us, et cetera, but there's so many fascinating research questions that still need to be answered. So one of the things we talk a lot about is these data deficits. This was when we did the research in polio. We need a better understanding of measuring kind of real time what people are searching for. So whilst Google Trends is not perfect, it is a useful tool in trying to understand what people are concerned about in real time. And it gets used by disinformation agents as a way to try and understand that. So if I just search for booster, you know, underneath it gives me related topics: dose, adverse effects, Tylenol, influenza. If you haven't spent time on Google Trends, it really is a good way of trying to understand what it is that people are concerned about. But be aware, Google Trends is very basic. So on any subject, if I just search for people's searches about misinformation, always do a comparison with Kardashian. And you realize that that's really the baseline. That's what people want to know about. And so it gives you a good comparison. I'm aware of time. Oh, so another thing we need to be much better at is tracking audio. So again, very, very difficult, but that means that we're not studying podcasts. We're not studying voice messages that get shared on WhatsApp. It's just a real black box. So we're really bad at visuals, we're really bad at video, and we're really bad at audio. And they are the platforms that disinformation agents use. We're pretty good at text, but that's not what they use, because text is the hardest to make sense of. And so why would disinformation agents do that? They want things that we're going to just try and make sense of quickly in an emotional way so that they can fool us. And as I said, we need to be better at measuring this longitudinal impact. How do we measure this over time? So I'm just going to finish with 3 case studies that might help and be somewhat of an inspiration. So the first one was the vaccine under the surface report that I mentioned earlier. So we scraped tweets, Facebook messages, and Instagram posts, and we basically just used a set of keywords related to vaccines. So we weren't specifically looking for misinformation, because remember at the top, it's hard to define just misinformation or just disinformation. So we decided to just pull down 20 million posts, or we decided to pull down all posts that were related to vaccines, vaccinations, jab, shots, lots of different keywords. And the result was 20 million posts. We then took the top, I can't remember now, I think 1,000 posts based on that which got the most engagement, but we took out news organizations. It was that which got most engagement from non-institutional accounts. And from there, we then, as you can see, over 5 million from Facebook pages, almost 5 million from Instagram, 2 million from Twitter, and we also looked at Facebook groups. So this is how many interactions, sorry, not posts, these were the interactions around the different posts that helped us decide which ones to focus on. And we decided that we had all of these posts that essentially had messages in them. So we wanted to have a definition of a message. So for the purposes of this analysis, we refer to messages as any claim, idea, or argument that is conveyed through an online publication. And we then took all of these messages and put them under narrative. So we used a definition from NATO, which I wasn't crazy about, but defines narratives as a cognitive process of ordering information into a structure of cause, effect, and consequence, and B, a system of stories structured in such a way as to make meaning, which kind of sounds a bit academic, but the idea was, how did all these different messages fit under narratives? And so we were looking for these narratives, and as I said, these were the 6. Now, I told you that the #1 narrative in English was liberty and freedom. I'm just going to give you 10 seconds to guess which of these was the #1 narrative in Spanish. So it was morality and religion. And in French, it was safety, efficacy. No, sorry. In French, it was political and economic motives. So what was interesting in all of those thousands and thousands of posts, the biggest narrative was not, is the vaccine safe? It was these other ways that people were talking about it. So that's why narrative analysis can be much more effective than just thinking about the individual atom of content. And so, again, I'll put the link in at the end, but you can read the whole report. These were the how the topics compared by language. So the second case study was one that we did based on some research we were doing in West Africa. We had been funded to basically study the way that polio was being discussed in a number of West African countries. And we were just qualitatively spending time on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, and YouTube, understanding what was happening. But what we realized is that quite a lot of the narratives that we were seeing in West Africa were actually coming from and had been exported by anti-vaccine groups in the US and Western Europe. So then we kind of changed and said, right, let's do an actual research study. So again, we pulled down systematically tweets, Facebook posts, and Instagram posts to look at some of these narratives. And so what we then saw was these global flows of information coming from the US and Western Europe and being repeated and emphasized in many of these countries with local examples, but the overall narrative, it didn't start in Nigeria. And so trying to, again, we stumbled across this. We didn't go in thinking that this was a problem, but we recognized a number of narratives as being those that were very famous from the work that we were doing in the US and Western Europe, and then saw some of these connections to how this was happening. And so, again, this is from the report, but we have these key narratives. So Western actors and international institutions connected to vaccines are untrustworthy. Their vaccines aren't safe. We then give example messages, and then we looked at tactics. So things like network syndication, repeated rehashing, coordinated copy paste, those types of things that we were able to see coming from certain areas in the West and then being repeated. The challenge, and we never really got to this, was this being funded by PR agencies, dark PR agencies? The ways that this was actually being funded, we never got to the bottom of. So I think I wanted to show you this as an example, is you can just study the content, but hopefully what many of you will be able to do is to then try and understand the funding mechanism behind this. But it is really hard, and we were not successful with this research. And finally, as you know, Donald Trump tweeted a lot. And so February of 2021, we did a study looking at the ways that his tweets were amplified on television. So we worked with the Internet Archive to look at the ways that his tweets were amplified. So the reason I, again, talk about this is because Donald Trump was sowing a narrative that it didn't matter what an individual tweet said. He was growing this narrative over years that the election wasn't safe. But we were focused on, should Twitter label this tweet? Should Facebook take down that post from Donald Trump? Should they take down Donald Trump entirely? But what we missed was the fact that it was the narrative that was important. And so he spent 4 years sowing a narrative that mail-in ballots weren't safe, so that after the 2020 election, the Stop the Steal movement, which was to say the election was stolen, the reason it was so successful so quickly was because this narrative had been seeded over a number of months. So again, why it's so important for us to think at the narrative level rather than at the individual level. So what we did with the Internet Archive was to use computational analysis to find in all of the television from MSNBC, CNN, and Fox, every time a Trump tweet was full screen. And basically, we just let the computer do its job, and then we could see how many times Trump's tweets were being amplified on television. And as you can see, a lot. There were no fact checks, there were no nothing. It was just his tweets full on screen, and for a total of 32 hours. So again, when you're doing your investigations, I really would beg you to not just study online in isolation. How is it working cross-platform, but how is it moving from platforms through to the news media, and then also through to offline spaces like churches, community centers, et cetera, WhatsApp groups. So to me, we have to understand the full information ecosystem. So just as a reminder, for those digital investigation recipes, they really helped so many of my team get up to speed on a number of the types of things that we're talking about, that I've been talking about today. But the last thing I'll say, just for as many of you are journalists, is this challenge of amplification, is that so many disinformation agents are deliberately trying to get the media to report on them. So the first time that QAnon was mentioned in the US was after a rally, a Trump rally, where QAnon supporters turned up wearing t-shirts and holding signs, because on 4chan, they had been discussing where to stand so they could get on camera. So they always think about this in your mind, is my reporting going to play into the role that the disinformation agents need me to play? So after that Trump rally, they were listing all of the mainstream media coverage of QAnon and saying, look, we've won, we've won. Another example is somebody created a parody site for Joe Biden. This was his original official site in 2020. Somebody created a parody site, and at the bottom, there were lots of videos of Biden with young girls. It was deliberately designed to undermine him. And in fact, look, you can see he was trying to sell t-shirts. It was just classically a parody site. But the New York Times reported on that site. And once the New York Times reported on the parody site, it ended up being higher in the search engine results than the genuine Joe Biden site. So again, just a reminder of the role that in the media we play in amplifying disinformation agents who, without our amplification, might not actually get legitimacy or search queries, et cetera, And I'll end with this recent one, which is the FDA, which is the US government agency, the Food and Drug Administration, recently put a video out warning people about not to cook chicken in NyQuil, which is kind of like a flu remedy. Well, nobody was really doing it. I don't know why they created this video, but after they put this video out, there were 7,000 more searches for it on TikTok. So it might seem like a silly example, but we have to also recognize that bad actors are looking to take advantage of journalists to get that legitimacy and to drive search queries. So unfortunately, when you do the kind of work you're going to do, always think about that. Like, what's the end goal and how can you report in a way that doesn't give oxygen to niche communities that might end up being a recruiting tool? So some of the key learnings that I hope you took away from this presentation is that we need to focus on narratives, not atoms of content. We need to do a better job of investigating the whole information supply chain, really being aware of when people have genuine questions that they need answering. And the tactics used in 2022 are quite different from 2016. So when I still see people obsessed with botnets, yes, there are bots out there, but there are other tactics that we see disinformation agents using deliberately to get around platforms. And I think we have to update some of the ways we think about the information ecosystem. And they certainly understand cross-platform spread and amplification in a way that they didn't necessarily in 2016. So hopefully you've got some of that from my talk, and I'm very happy to answer any questions that you might have. Oh, and if anybody...
Excellent. Yeah, excellent. You are really on time. No sé por qué estoy hablando en inglés.
I don't know why I was speaking in English. I'll speak in Spanish now. Thank you, Claire. You were perfectly on time, and we have a whole slew of questions for you from our participants. Thank you to all of those who placed their questions in the chat. Let me remind you, your questions are welcome in any of the languages that we're covering today. So have a drink of water or tea, Claire, and we'll start off with the questions. Let me begin with a question that comes to us from a colleague of from Brazil. And she's asking us, could you explain better what the difference is between disinformation, misinformation, and malinformation? Because when she translates these terms to Portuguese, these concepts appear to be labeled in the same way or have the same meaning. So let's go back, if you will, to that first fundamental concept that you shared.
Absolutely. And well, so lovely to hear from you from Brazil, but I remember this came up when I was in Brazil a lot, and people were like, isn't there just one word? Oh, Brazilians loved using the term fake news, and I kept saying, stop using that term. But so... Evelyn
es quien te hace la pregunta. Evelyn.
The question is from Evelyn. Evelyn is the source of that question from Brazil.
Thank you for the question. So disinformation is actually a very small amount of what we see. And it's content created by people who know that they're creating false content, and they are doing so to cause harm. And the motivations for creating disinformation, number one, tends to be financial. But so the harm, you can argue, well, is it harmful? Well, yes, if somebody's making money off fooling me, that's harmful. So as Craig explained, people are doing that either to drive you to their website so that they can get you to click on ads, or they're driving you to their website to get you to sign up so they can try and sell you things. So there's that motivation. The other motivation is political, and that might be with a capital P, it might be international influence, it might be at the local level at an election, but it might be influence of like taking down a local business person that's your rival. So you're trying to cause harm like at the personal and political level. The third motivation is just, can I get away with it? So when people try and fool journalists into running with the wrong name after there's been a crime, they're just doing it to see if they can get away with it. But that's disinformation. That's people deliberately creating knowingly false or misleading content to cause harm. Misinformation, if you think it's downstream, so it gets created by these people. Misinformation is the sharing of that content by people who don't realize that it's false. The problem, as I discussed in the lecture, is the woman, the anti-vaxxer, who said she was informed, because the problem is that she would say she's not causing harm. But let's forget her for a second, because she complicates matters. So misinformation is downstream, and that's the sharing of false information without realizing it. Malinformation, I would say, is upstream again, because that's somebody who is deliberately trying to cause harm, but they're using correct information to cause harm. So we tend to focus on, oh, it's all false content. But sometimes if somebody, for example, is leaking a politician's emails, sometimes that's in the public interest, but sometimes you could argue, well, that's done to create harm. Or imagine that there was a plane arriving in Sao Paulo and 3 people had yellow fever and somebody leaked the list of passengers. Well, that would be an example of malinformation. So it's genuine information, but it's when people take it from the private into the public sphere. So hopefully that was somewhat helpful, but it's thinking about motivations and it's thinking about harms.
Muchísimas gracias. Vamos ahora con una que viene en español.
Perfect. Now we have a question that comes to us from Valentina Martinez. The question, Claire, is, and this is the comment, is we work on verifying the veracity, the truthfulness of texts, of photos, and we have more tools perhaps for that. How can we begin to work on the truthfulness, the trustworthiness of audio content? Do you have any suggestions, any advice for how to check or how to verify or check on audio content as distinct from photos or text?
Yeah, it's so difficult. And in fact, when we were working on the 2018 Brazilian election, and the Brazilians will remember this, there was that audio file that came from Bolsonaro in hospital. And there were real concerns that it was a deep fake. And we ended up having to go to an audio specialist who basically did a comparison of Bolsonaro's speech and looked at the difference and did amazing work. But it took 3 days, by which point it had been shared very, very widely. So there are audio specialists. And if you have a high profile example like that, it would be worth using an audio specialist. But for the kind of audio messages that travel, we don't have good forensic tools like we do a little bit with images. So it comes down to just, asking for the original audio file. Often if people can't produce that, then we've got a problem. So, there was one that circulated very widely during the pandemic was a South African nurse. And every time people tried to get the original file, nobody had it. So that was kind of a warning clue that we weren't able to say it's definitely false, but we haven't been able to get the original file. So, I often talk to technical engineers and say, we've got to get cheaper tools to do audio analysis, because I don't worry about deep fakes as much. I worry about impersonations that, if effective, could be very impactful.
Agregando a lo que vos decís, durante el proyecto de Reverso, en el que First Draft participó.
During the Reverso project in the elections in Argentina, we also worked with a group of sound engineers from the science community of Argentina, but it was expensive. And in addition to the cost, I see your dog, we needed for the person to give us, the source person, to give us a new recording, because sometimes the other recordings on TV were not sufficient. So it is something that we can maybe ask, fact checkers can figure out how to do better, or for sound engineers to develop a tool that would make it easier to compare these audio patterns.
Inci Psyche dice, ¿podés por favor hablar un poco más?
Can you talk more about these agents of disinformation? Are they dark press agencies, corporations? Are they the state? Are they lobbyists, PR companies? Who are they? How are these organizations that are behind, in the background? How can we imagine they operate? What you know about them anyway?
Yeah, that's a great question. And what we've definitely seen over the last sort of 2 to 3 years is there's a number of essentially dark PR agencies. So, and a lot of this, I would say, is coming from countries and it's not just Russia, China, and Iran. The problem is that many powerful people have now learned how effective it can be to use these techniques, but they also know that they can't get their fingers dirty. So what we see and what your investigations, it's really hard to do, but is to try and understand, you know, financial transactions that might help us get to this, because it's less about, it used to be that they would kind of create these bot factories that were increasingly people, because when the platforms really cracked down on automation, people would pay people in countries very small amounts of money to basically sit all day clicking publish. So the thing that we see is PR companies that have these kind of human networks that they use for these influence operations, but it's always 2 steps removed now. And when you look, and when I talk to people who do some of this analysis, they say, I'm increasingly feeling like somebody who works at the CIA rather than a disinformation analyst, because I'm really worried about how so much of this is actually at the country level, or very powerful people with a lot of money who are understanding that they can have influence using these kind of techniques. So not to worry anybody, but I feel a little bit more worried than I used to in 2016, which was like, blah, 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 we've got some disinformation. Now there's many, many more people who've recognized and are trying to influence, including the US and the UK. All countries are doing it. It's now part of the dark arts.
Gracias, Claire. Otra pregunta que tenemos.
Another question we have from Ayrton, so that we go from the dark scenarios to something which is more optimistic. Ayrton Gonzalez, how do you value the use of memes to promote healthy information as a creative strategy to fight disinformation in networks? He works in an initiative like this in Venezuela. Would like to hear from you about that.
Thank you for that wonderful question. So if I had a magic wand, I would put graphic designers and content producers in every health authority, because we absolutely need to learn that our human brains respond to visuals. And also on our phones, we don't want to click a link. We want to see it right on our screen. And the reason that memes are so powerful is because the best memes are enthematic, which is the term that we use, which is to make sense of something, you have to have a wider framework. So a joke works. If I say to Lara, I'm trying to think of an Elon Musk joke, but say I made a joke about Elon Musk, you would laugh because you know right now what Elon Musk is doing. So your brain has been required to kind of pull from other knowledge to make sense of my joke. And that's why memes work, because they're a nod and a wink to a trend or to a film or to a story. And so they actually require more of our brain power. So that's why memes are so powerful. And that's why the other side uses them so much, because they use them to activate your outrage about something else. We need to activate people's knowledge base using memes to get people to love them, laugh at them, but also activate a different part of our brain. So the problem is many people like us, like researchers, journalists, fact checkers, scientists, we love text. We love it so much, we just keep writing words. But that's not the best way for our brains to make sense of the world. But we feel awkward about being emotional, being personal, being visual. It's not the way we're trained. But that is what we have to be better at, because that is the way that our brains work. And the other side has figured that out much, much, much better than we have.
Perfecto. Bueno, vamos a
Now, we are going to put together 2 questions, Adrian Pino and Valeria. And he says, can we see somewhere the background work that you did to analyze the 20 million posts, to understand better how you did it, what tools you used? And I put these two questions together because Valeria asks, what tools would you recommend to do analytic research in large scale? Like, for example, follow up on the publications you mentioned. This was polio specific, what Valeria was asking, the case you mentioned on polio.
Yeah, so in terms of the 20 million, that was basically scraping, using API, using different Python scripts to pull down that information. But your question about analyzing is, we then, from the 20 million, sorted them by engagement level, and then took the top, I can't remember now, but I think 1,500 posts that had the most engagement, but we took out any news organizations or anything that you would expect to get high engagement. So we were looking for highly engaged messages from normal people. And then we just did human qualitative analysis. So we just coded them. One thing I'll say is, and I'm not the expert in this, but we used pretty basic topic modeling, where you can basically, and I can get Rory, our research manager, to explain, but it's relatively easy to take large data sets of text and then pull out the key topics. That it's not perfect, but sometimes if you've got a huge data set, it allows you to say, well, okay, these are some of the major terms that are coming up, and that can sometimes be a shortcut. But for all of the research that I mentioned, it included a lot of human coding. It was just qualitative analysis, because I personally, that's my training, and I worry sometimes we miss the nuance if we just use, computational techniques for everything.
Perfecto, muchísimas gracias. Una pregunta ahora de José Luis López.
José Luis López Aguirre asks, can you change the metadata of videos and WhatsApp messages? The question is, as far as you know, have you seen changes in metadata in videos or WhatsApp messages?
I haven't, but I have to, it's a good question. If a video is on WhatsApp, and I have to say, I don't know, to be honest. It's a great question. But it goes to the voice messages, the videos. I mean, when I started this work in 2010, we had so much metadata, like on people's tweets, you'd actually get their GPS coordinates. So it's much, much harder to do this work now because so much metadata gets hidden for privacy reasons. And also just because the platforms, they don't want to have to make that accessible to you because it just makes the platform slower. So yeah, I don't have a good answer, I'm afraid, but I should have. So I'll try and find out.
Nos deja pensando, sí, creo que...
We think about that. The question of whether we can use sources as trustworthy, or was that also changed, altered? Sergio Luz, another fellow of the International Center for Journalism, as giving some answers, and imagine we can follow that track. Jairo Molina asks, why did you say TikTok is a gold mine? How can we get information from it? How do you suggest, if somebody is thinking about a research pitch, how do you suggest we take advantage of that gold mine?
Yeah, so I will try and share some links to some kind of basic TikTok scrapers, but we don't actually have good tools to monitor TikTok. There's somebody I know, Cameron Hickey, has a platform called Junkipedia, and on that he's running TikTok in the background on certain topics. But to be honest, if you want to study TikTok, one of the best ways is just to think about a topic and start basically watching TikTok videos, and the algorithm will very quickly work out that that's what you're interested in, and you will start seeing that. So like maybe making 5 fake accounts and just trying to like run them on burner phones. But yeah, that to me is I wish there are rumors that TikTok will give API access in the spring to some researchers, but we really have almost no access to TikTok. So that, for me, even if you did what looked like a small TikTok study, it would still be better than what we have right now, which is almost nothing on TikTok. So I do think that that's a huge area for people to look at.
Y tenemos una...
And we have a last question because we're out of time. And thank you for all your answers. Monica Camacho, who was repeated by somebody else. How should we journalists be proactively work to debunk misinformation? When should we not do it so that we don't call the attention on that anymore? Is there any rule, any tactics, any recommendation, any measure that you could give us to guide us in that decision of whether proactively debunk or just do nothing so we don't call the attention? The example you were giving with the parody a page on the New York Times article.
Yeah, this is a really important point. And I talk about what I call the tipping point, but some of the things to look for is how much spread does the rumor have in a particular community? So for example, in the US leading up to the elections, there's often rumors circulating, for example, in certain Latin communities. Now, does that mean that CNN should run a debunk? No, because many other communities haven't seen this rumor. So the question is how much spread does a rumor have? And if actually not many people have seen it, it's not worth debunking. But once it kind of passes a certain point, and that point differs depending on what your news organization is. So you know your audience, so you have to make the decision, at what point is it now worrying enough to my audience that I need to step in and make clear that this isn't true? And that all the time is something that journalists have to think about, by recognizing that bad actors are sometimes deliberately trying to get you to debunk because they want you to give their rumor oxygen. So that's the kind of experience that you get after some time of thinking, yes, this is a rumor I should be working on. But lastly, I'll just say that we have a lot of really good research about inoculation, which is the more that you teach your audiences the tactics and techniques used, the better they are at spotting it. So I would say there's a lot of space for educating your audiences about that, rather than waiting till they've seen something false and then telling them they're wrong. But that's for another lecture.
Es un programa largo, lo tenemos en cuenta para...
That's a long program, and we'll keep it in mind for another opportunity, for another occasion. Just a fact check that confused me. The comment about WhatsApp, where metadata is clean, was Sergio Lupe, who you know from the project that we worked on already. Sergio, he was the one that put a clarification of that in the chat. If you will now join me in thanking Claire for this master class, for her generous sharing and her kindness in spending this time with us. Renata is here. I think Renata is not going to be on camera, but Renata is now asking you to complete your survey questions to the audience, and so that we can organize and design the future events in our Disarming Disinformation program. Claire, you have a final word. If you have a few parting words to share with us, that's fine. The floor is yours. If not, that's fine too.
Well, I just wanted to say thank you so much for this opportunity, and I will send an email with lots of links to things that I talked about. So I'm aware I didn't put all the links in the presentation, but I'm really excited for April. I'm really excited to see some of the investigations, but there's so much important work that needs to be done. And I think this group can do it. So yeah, it was a pleasure to spend time with you this morning.
Gracias. Son los momentos en los que me gustaría no estar remoto.
These are the times when I wish we were not so far away, that we were in person so that we could clap. And so just, I hope you hear our clapping and end on that note. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Si les parece bien, una vez que van
All right.
terminando la evaluación,
As you are completing then the survey questions, the quick feedback survey, you can add your word in the chat, say completed or finished, and we'll take a 10-minute break before we rejoin to meet again at 11:15 Eastern Time, or Washington time, and to begin with the final of our 4 master classes with Janina Segnini. I have since yesterday been referencing her presentation when Claire was today talking about that effect of amplification, the dark agents of this amplification. We'll hear more about that and in greater detail from Janina Segnini. Have a quick break for a coffee, stretch your legs, and come back. Thank you.
Bueno, hola a todos de vuelta. Si están por ahí y me están escuchando, genial.
All right, if you are joining us again, thank you. We will, in just a few moments, move to our last masterclass. Let me remind you, if you have not completed your survey for either Patricia's presentation yesterday or Claire's today, if you want to follow with interpretation, Janina will be speaking in Spanish. I will be asking questions in Spanish as well. You can choose whether, if you wish to hear this in English, using the language interpretation button at the bottom of Zoom, same for Portuguese. And let me remind you that those of you that will be proposing or pitching research programs, you need to think of these in a transnational context. These should be collaborative efforts that will include freelance journalists from a number of different countries or media outfits, media companies from different countries. The idea here is that there be a transnational collaborative component to this. If the if our behind the scenes powers will spotlight Janina Seinini, I see her now. It is a great privilege and pleasure to be with Janina. I have learned from her for many years now, learned from what she does, learned about her work. And this is an opportunity for me to know much. For those of you who don't know Janina, she's the director of the Master in Science in Data Journalism from the Columbia University in New York. She's a award-winning journalist. I remember very well when she won the Gabo Prize to Excellence in Journalism. She's won many more awards also. And until February of 2014, she led a team at that point, at that time, I believe it was a pioneering team of journalists and engineers that worked on data journalism using data, publicly available database, but also private databases to tell stories in context and presenting that information. This might seem today like what we do every day. But when Janina began doing this, it was really an extraordinarily pioneering effort. So we're very, very pleased to have you here. Welcome, Janina. Thank you. Thank you very much, Laura, for inviting me and for bringing me here. I am, in fact, very impressed with being able to be part of this project. Thank you to ICFJ and to the Knight Center. And thank you to the head chief convener of the Galaxies, to Rosenthal. And what a privilege and a pleasure to be able to do this in any one of our 3 languages. Thank you. Before giving you your much deserved 45 minutes, let me start off with a ping pong Q&A with you, asking you questions. Do you choose mountains or beaches? I want a beach with mountains in the Caribbean. All right, very well. Dogs or cats or palm trees? I'm not a pet person. Coffee or tea? Coffee. No doubt about that. Favorite food? Favorite dish? Rondon. That's a Caribbean food. What does rondon include for those of us that don't know? Fish, shellfish with coconut milk and some vegetables. It's cooked over a slow fire and it's delicious. Sort of like a Brazilian moqueca, maybe, but a Caribbean version of a moqueca. So explore, remember, Janina, if you ever tried rondon, What's your favorite city of all of the cities in the Americas? Just choose one. At lunchtime and dinner time, Lima. We had two people choose Lima. Patricia also chose Lima. Of course, you can eat so well in Lima. Who will win the World Cup? Well, Qatar already won. You now have me in a problem, in a quandary, because we have Brazilians here, we have Argentines here, and Costa Rica is also there. I would love Ghana to win. I would love it if Ghana won. All right. You have about 220 attendees, very eager and enthusiastic to learn who's paying to lie to us, who's paying to spread disinformation and lies throughout the Americas. We're going to focus on the context of the Americas for disarming disinformation, and I'm here if you need me, but the floor is all yours. A very special greeting to my colleagues throughout Latin America. You're all superheroes to me, and particularly to my colleagues in Central America, who are working, many of you, in exile and having a hard time of it. Before beginning, I do want to tell you that I've been for 30 some years an investigative journalist. I have worked for 9 years here as a professor at the university, at Columbia University, where I began and direct the master's program in data journalism, started in July of this year. And this is investigative journalism and data journalism masters, and I direct the fellowship, which is a program where we hire 3 graduates to investigate cross-border issues. Maria Teresa Ronderos and other colleagues helped in funding the CLIP, the Latin American Center for Investigative Journalism, CLIP. And I'm not an expert in disinformation. When Laura reached out to me, I thought, well, this will be a mental class. I want to thank the students of the techniques on investigative journalism that we've just did this semester. I'll present some of the work did in this class to show you some interesting aspects, characteristics of the transnational phenomena of disinformation. If you'll let me share the slide, share my screen. I'm not an expert, as I was saying, in disinformation as such, but for some time now, anyone who reads the news and is minimally informed, you will see that democracies in general are flooded by the work of digital mercenaries. We're talking about an army of digital journalism, of digital mercenaries. I know we face all kind of operators, disinformation, who work in a very low-level, kind of artisanal way at the local level. But what we're concerned here is the children of Cambridge Analytica. This is, if you will remember, in 2016, we could measure the impact, and during the UK Brexit election or referendum, we could see what the collective effect of large volumes of data that are cataloged according to feelings, and we filter this through the tools of cognitive science. This allowed those propagators, those disseminators, if you will, to narrowly focus and direct disinformation messages. You'll hear a lot about that. But what I'm here to tell you is there's a lot of information from Cambridge Analytica that are throughout Latin America, throughout the world, doing multi-million-dollar businesses to use these techniques. Just to give you a framework for what I'm trying to tell you and what we've learned of the master teachers here from Claire and Patricia and Craig, all having a lot of experience in this area. They're very focused on the content, on tracing the content, things that I am not particularly informed on, and particularly tracing the money interest. But what I'm interested in is if we follow the food chain of that money, the message that finally arrives is not the result of just a plant that comes up out of the ground, but rather it's planted from an intentional source usually using a platform like Google or somebody else. And I'm talking about large transnational campaigns for disinformation who are doing this based on data, always based on data, and directing their messages to certain groups, to certain clusters who have been highly studied. This is not an amateur effort in our political context. What we have to understand, this is the second phase, if not the third phase, of all of these messages. The visible face of a political campaign has the candidate's phase, but we don't see that army of technicians that support a campaign and monitors the narrative in real time, the discourse, and is testing, like, if you will, a constant focus group testing of the messaging. And then there are large global forces. I'm not going to cite all of them, but there are these examples. These could be intelligence groups, state intelligence operators, transnational, very powerful industries. There are industries that can control many countries in Africa and in Latin America, donors, individual donors, and religious groups as well, as we could see in Claire's presentation. I want to focus on this third group and how we can find the interrelationship, the connections between these groups and the macrocosmos, if you will. I'm not going to earn even a coffee from the design of this graphic, but I'm trying to explain these two parallel worlds here within the context of elections and politics. And let me clarify that these transnational campaigns that I'm talking about, you'll see some examples. These are campaigns that operate in a number of countries, multiple countries, and normally we never learn who is behind them because they're parallel worlds. On the right side, you see the candidate, the little coins that you see there. There's money changing hands at every stage there. The visible side of the campaign are very famous campaign advisors who trains candidates for debates, for public speaking. And then on the left side, we have the hidden campaign donors. The campaign sometimes hires these data analytic machines, multi-platform data mining, data analytics, and these donors that are unknown fund campaigns. And when I say donors, these could be any ones of the ones that I mentioned before. They could be transnational organizations of any sort, but the mechanism is the same, whether it's about vaccines or winning a political election. This is candidates like Bukele in El Salvador, who are permanently in a campaign. It doesn't matter whether there's an election or not. He is always campaigning. His campaign machinery, if you will, is always operating. So there are specialized groups who work in artificial intelligence that automate and test hundreds of thousands of messages and are coming up with ways to address the technical obstacle, which are honestly not so many, that the digital platforms place. When we talk about WhatsApp, I think a lot has been mentioned about that already. So what do these people do? They put all of this in a lab, what we can know from monitoring the internet, to establish predictive models. And we're always trying to analyze, it could be fashion brands, and they're trying to test with geographically specific audiences reactions to messages, making this information anonymized results, information that is already understood by Meta, the Meta company, and the Google company. These are companies that operate in many countries. And so what happens on the visible side here? The advertising finds new content generators that nobody knew of before, and that now will be support the government or support the candidate. And the traditional or independent media, traditional media and independent media normally is blocked from having access to some information. And in some cases, they're outright unable to operate. So there's an explosion of a fairly well-designed campaign using artificial intelligence to orient certain messages to a certain location where you can know that a telephone number has been identified as a voter in a certain campaign area and the message was specifically designed to reach that voter with those preferences in that location.
How do you track the money? It's a difficult task. How do you track money? The money is used to buy things or is reflected in processes. And these are public documents that we can have access to: campaign donations, campaign expenditures, public contracts, ads, leaks, and also some sources in the US, which are very important, as I will show you, to look at the movement of money. When we talk about tracking money, you cannot track money if you don't know who it is that's behind it. And we have to find the digital mercenaries. One day they sell trousers, the next day they support a left-wing candidate, the next day a right-wing candidate. Some are ideologically consistent, but in general, it is an industry made of data scientists, publicists. So how do you follow these people in your country? You have to understand that it's not one political advisors that the politician has. They have a squad, and each one looks at different things, surveys, etc. in a campaign. And in the departments, they add the data mining and data intelligence. And that is a market that becomes in something that sends specific messages to support or attack political options or other options. How do we begin this investigation? I'm going to show you two examples of these investigative techniques. We started with common sense. And since 2017, Facebook, Meta, and Google, Facebook is Meta now, they created departments to investigate violations of their policies. And they create reports where sometimes they mention the names of companies. I did a study for Latin America, and there are dozens of reports since 2017 of transnational campaigns that operate in Latin America, from the US, from Israel, and from different places. I'm going to show you two that we followed. The methodologies begin with the reports. These are the same people. They are niche. That are becoming larger and broader. And we try to understand these groups that operate in the region, and they're always the same. That's important because the names change, but they're the same, and we have to understand their techniques. We have many sources. We also use this report of industrialized disinformation, and I recommend it. There's a report for each country. It's been published 2 years ago. The techniques are the same, although it hasn't been updated. So they cite methodologies and apply techniques for this type of campaign, but also they show where they started to use artificial intelligence, and practically all countries are being targeted. They also monitor global campaigns. And I'll leave the link so you can look at it. Let's begin with case one. The circle that you see doesn't mean the process goes in circles. It's a permanent circle, and there's no order to it. An investigation can start anywhere. In this case, as a methodology, I'll start from a meta report, this one, August 2020, 2 years ago. A coordinated inauthentic behavior report is the name of this activity. And Facebook says that they removed 46 accounts, 41 pages, etc., of a company, CLS Strategies, a network focused primarily on Venezuela, also in Mexico and Bolivia. And they say that they found this activity as part of our proactive investigation to identify this type of illegal movement. This is what the report says. They spent $3.6 million in ads targeted to these 3 countries, and that's all Facebook says. What does an investigative journalist do from those 2 paragraphs? We know the name of the company, and with that, we've already have a step forward because we start to expand the network of people, directors, shareholders, and also corporations that are related to this group that are identified with CLS Strategies. It's a company based in Washington, D.C. When Facebook published this, the company erased everything about their operation. But in the Wayback Machine, we can see that they said that Latin America, Europe, and the Middle East had been supported by these corporations. And you see there the government of Nicaragua, Honduras, Mexico as well. So several Latin American countries as well as organizations are listed there. What the investigation concludes is that CLS Strategies has been working for years in Latin America, in Brazil, Colombia, Ecuador, Mexico, Nicaragua, and Peru, giving advice to candidates such as Fernando Enrique Cardoso in Brazil, Uribe in Colombia, and others. What do we do from there? We know more about the company. We start to investigate the members. And what we do is look at public records. There's a whole protocol of how to search these public documents, and they are at the end. When we talk about corporations, the company is registered in the US, and this means there's a lot of available public records. This is one that's very important. A few months before CLS was blocked by Facebook, they registered in the Department of Justice in the US in a FARA, a database that I recommend you visit. The link is there. It's advice to the plurinational government of Bolivia for free and open elections and for the communication messages, etc. The signature is Brian Berry, the CLS agent, and that is public information. It tells us how much the company made, and the Bolivians paid for the campaign. In the sandwich, we have one more piece. We have the messages that were distributed during a period of time, and when we start looking at these public documents, the document says that for 90 days and for $90,000, CLS worked with the Bolivian state, and for that, CLS will create and distribute communication material, interaction with media, and also communication services for the state of Bolivia. There's a follow-up after that. And we see all the meetings they had with the different organizations in the US, federal state organizations, Congress. We see Ted Cruz there, Marco Rubio, Díaz-Balart. So, third technique, and let me go back so you see the name. This is Ingi Psyche's investigation, and I'm showing the documents she had access to. LinkedIn did a study. What happens when a company such as this is sanctioned by Google or Meta? Their working hypotheses. My student says, well, they continue operating, creating other companies in other tax havens. But the Ingix exercise was really good because she followed the people. You have to follow money, yes, but you have to follow people. And many of those that work for CLS Strategies started working for another company called Vision 360. We don't know what they do, but there are communications, public relations, etc. Other public documents. You have to investigate corporations, get a startup tree, looking at how they are connected. This is one of the directors of CLS Strategies, Juan Cortinas. And they erased their profile in Excel, but I'm sure he's in CLS, but he's probably in another organization. This is how these consultants moved. There are many organizations. One of the ones I prefer is the Internet Observatory from Sandra University. They have a research center to understand this type of campaigns. And Facebook gives them, Graphica and others, the data so that they can study it. So what happened with the CLS case? CLS had accounts operated in the US. You see where the accounts were, and the managers, where were they? And where were the countries that were targeted? We have the names of the pages there. And what the study found is that this campaign directed from Washington was attacking Guaido, no, rather defending Guaido and attacking some pages of Chavismo. But the most interesting happened in Bolivia. We found that they signed a contract with the government. The contract, when we look at it in the journalistic context, took part when this interim president took office in Bolivia, and she hired CLS. The results are these messages, pages defending her work. And on the other hand, a series of pages against Evo Morales and his political party that had been ousted from power. So it is a direct attack from abroad, from Washington, intervening in the Bolivian politics. So another technique to trace money in the US, and I'd like to teach this in all countries because each country has a version of this. Not only the reports of the political campaigns, expenditures and income, especially expenditures in the Federal Election Commission. If we look for CLS strategies, you will see this is the Excel spreadsheet that can be downloaded with all the payments they got and all the candidates that paid CLS, type of payment, type of service. This comes directly from political parties. So this type of information is really great because many just pop up there as receiving grants from the government. And also this during the pandemic, they received pandemic benefits.
And as Cristina Roman has said in my class, they focused on this campaign that was detected in March of 2019. Facebook removed 265 Facebook and Instagram accounts, pages, groups, and events. And look at the list. They were operating from Israel, Nigeria, focused on Nigeria, Senegal, Togo, Angola, Niger, Tunisia, along with activities in Latin America and Southeast Asia. Then the partners that had access to that information not only detected the name of the company, but the countries in which Archimedes Group from Tel Aviv, Archimedes this is all public information, so I can share it with you now for you to understand the dimensions of these transnational campaigns in all the countries that they operate in. This is a company created by 3 Israelis in Tel Aviv, and imagine that between 2012 and 2019, they paid $800,000 and reached $812,000 and reached 2.8 million users. This was paid in US dollars, in checks from Israel and in Brazilian reais. The sources of payment are in those countries. The investigations that my students undertook to know who was behind this company are Israelis. Their slogan is, "We use everything that is available to change the reality according to our clients' wishes." This is taken from their page. It's if you use the Wayback Machine, all of this has been removed, but the same company from Israel not only was showing this, but this was designed specifically for managing massive social media campaigns using all these tactics. And DFR Lab, at DFR Lab, which is constantly doing technical studies and impact campaigns, wrote a report on this campaign from Israel. And these are some of the examples of where they had direct effect, direct incidents in campaigns in Nigeria, in Tunisia, in Mali. And I want to concentrate on what's happened in Venezuela. This was a massive effort, more than in any other country, if you will. And in Honduras, I want to show you what has happened and what we know. In Honduras, these are the messages that were shared. These were messages that defended the administration of the then president of Honduras, who is now in jail for drug trafficking charges, Manuel Zelaya Rosales. And also there were campaigns such as this one, God Save Me Honduras, that was focused specifically on Facebook and WhatsApp. So we know Archimedes Group, the name of the company. You don't have to be afraid of internet. You can go find where these companies are registered, online corporations. They found out the Tel Aviv registration for the company Archimedes Group. This is V-Point Archimedes Group Limited. And in Honduras, it was a little harder finding in the business registry of Tegucigalpa in Honduras to find this company. And this was a company that was dissolved once it was known what they were doing in Honduras. We already have a name to follow the money trail. When this company was constituted in 2019, it names a person in charge of the assets of the Israeli company in Honduras, and we have the name of that person, his identity, that wrapped up, liquidated the operations of that company. And in this way, we can continue to look for public registries to come up with, there are many techniques. I'm going to name all of them, and I don't want to extend my time too much, but this is the address on Yigalalon Street 98. If we go to Google Maps and we look and we click on the red button at that address, we can say what other companies are located in this. We get the coordinates of that building. We can go to TripBack or to any other tool and look for a geo-localized search to find out messages that generated from a kilometer in a radius of a kilometer from that same location. It's different to look for a building in Tokyo and in Hong Kong than a mining company, if you will, in the Amazon in Peru. But these are tools that are going to monitor in real time geographic location. One that we are inaugurating with Ana Maria Ronderos, together with Rigoberto Carvajal from Rigoberto has been developing a platform that's called Nina, which basically allows the compilation of public companies by persons, public contracts. The registration is free to have access to information through just sending an email. And you can look in multiple databases from different countries. And I think that's what is needed here, a cross-border approach. I use these trial memberships to monitor hashtags. Here, no country in Latin America has public enemy, prensa basura, trash media is the translation of this in Spanish, is used in Mexico and in Peru, prensa canalla, renegade press or untrustworthy press in Costa Rica and Argentina. Prensa canalla operates in Costa Rica and Argentina. Here's another tool that I love because it shows the networks that in the last 7 days, it'll tell you accounts that interacted with a given hashtag. Botometer is good to detect from 1 to 5. What are the sources that are detected by the botometer? I haven't even shown you all of the tools. RAND.org, I don't know how much they spent, but they have tools and databases. Most of these tools are fantastic, some better for one thing, others for another. And the final information that I want to share with you are some important questions. This changes very quickly. What's important is the mental framework that we're using. Of course, there are local campaigns. Some are hyper-local campaigns, very directed to certain interests. So we need to understand in the broadest scope, when this has to do with disinformation, specific disinformation campaigns for a given location. There's a complex manual that can be used here. I first asked, where are the addresses that person has lived in? Because we're going to look at mortgages, marriages, their jobs, where they've worked. Legal filings, bankruptcies, if they're participating in lobbying, if they've registered, if they've been a public official, if they've made donations, if they've been involved in exports or imports. All of the following the money efforts means following the assets. All of that list, I'm not going to read it now because I don't want to burn up the few minutes that I have left. But this is not only assets of the person themselves, but of their families. There are always straw purchasers or straw owners in Latin America. When you want to hide assets, you get somebody else to be the named owner. And these operate as transnational efforts. They have data experts, but the person who sends the messages in the local language are local PR folks, local advertising experts. So we're always thinking, how do I investigate these organizations? There's always multiple public data registries or databases that can show you how they are networked, how they're organized. And I gave you some of the tools already to track the money and to understand the connections with public contracts. I think that's all I have to share with you right now. Thank you, Janina. You are perfectly on time. We have just a minute or two more, a minute or two left in the time allotted to you. So you've made it easy for me. The speakers have all been very timely and considerate in keeping within the time allotted. We have questions. We always want to hear from our audience, so ask me more questions. If you want to take a second to have a glass of water, or shall we get started? All right. So let's get started with some of the questions that are already here. Let me remind you, you can ask your questions in the language that is best for you, the one you're most comfortable in, and I will ask those questions as I see them in the chat. Janina. Jairo Molina is asking a question. Thank you. Jairo, you've asked good questions in all of the master classes. What methodology did you apply in the research that you just shared from CLS and the Archimedes group? The methodology is the one that I showed, to begin with just the name of a company, what we get from Facebook, to then figure out where the company was registered, who are the directors, what assets do they own, what did they have before, what address, or do they have subsidiaries, where they operate, what countries. For example, Facebook will tell us that this company operated in 6 countries in Latin America. So we then look for the names. If we have the names, we look at local registrations, business registrations, everything that we can do. Think in real life terms, all of the operations that have to be done. How do we, if there's a remodeling of a building, for example, if you have an address, you can find out in the Ministry of Public Buildings or the Buildings Registry, whatever the government entity, there can be inspections for remodeling. Somebody signed that. So you can be creative in following the names. In all of the publicly available databases, you can find the information to reconstruct these networks involving multiple companies and to do a timeline that will show you all of the activities that have been undertaken to date. So
Inia Velázquez says, how do we track hiring by private companies? One of the tools that you mentioned in CLIP, can you give her other suggestions on how to do it? The first thing is to find out how they mask them, because from what I know, the most intelligent way to mask them is say that these hidden donors for campaigns, be it governments or whatever forces underlie them, they pay directly this mega agency so that they do the work. And there, nothing stays in the country. That's the ideal way to work because nothing is registered. In Costa Rica, we found out through a leaked audio the names of the advisors, how much they were making, who was paying them, and they that were the ones that were targeting automated messages for one of the candidates. So sometimes you have leaks like that, but sometimes it's public information. In Colombia, a hacker gave the information. So you have to connect the dots from what you know and escalate and say, or climb up. The agency started here, this agency, who goes up, go one step after the other, who is the mayor's candidate. Facebook and Google can tell you the campaign was to defend that mayor candidate in Panama, in Brazil. So go and look at the reports. Another question by Dagmar Thiel. He says, now that Twitter is about to end, what else do you do geo-localized follow-up? What else do you think you could do? I'm using marketing tools, and there are several that are looking at TikTok. One called Brand 24, and another Mention. They're all marketing, and you have to pay for them. And they are very powerful because they bring you all the information of all social networks, monitoring keywords. So with trials, there are many tools ready, but I invite you to look at that page because there are other names there as well. Valentina would like to know if you can find records of a party, a US Congress, a person that financed an X country in South America. Whether in the US there's a public record where that can be found. It will not be found as such. It's illegal to interfere in another country. So and say, oh, Marco Rubio did this or that. It is hidden in the in lobbying companies that are registered in the DOJ, and they pay agencies such as CLS and others for them to influence senators that go and travel to Latin America and conduct other activities. But to research who is behind them, there's something I didn't mention, are the foundation. In the US, foundations, except churches, have to fill out a form called 990. They have to specify their income and their expenditures. A lot of money in the US goes to Latin America. So GuideStar, there are many free tools that allow you to do the search to see whether the money behind foundations or religious foundations were used to pay those agencies. The page I showed you of the US electoral page is it's fun. You look at Facebook recipient and you see how much US candidates have spent on Facebook. And also you can look at these large agencies. There is not a single country in the Americas, even Canada is in one of the cases I didn't mention, a country where disinformation is being generated for Latin America. There's evidence that these campaigns are not small, local, but they're much broader. A follow-up on this Facebook issue. Angelica says how to map who finances Facebook ads from an anonymous account. How could that be done? Everything is anonymous to start with. Disinformation starts with domains that produce content that are exponentially replicated with bots and artificial intelligence. But the starter is from something that looks legitimate information center. Where are they registered? All these domains that do disinformation are in domains by proxy, which is the arm of GoDaddy. GoDaddy, one of the largest hosts or domain hosts, has an arm specialized for domains by proxy, and you do not know who's behind it. It didn't used to be like that. The whole industry is built for that. So all of the money that nobody knows where it's coming from and where it's going in content distribution, they operate at very complex levels with offshore corporations, and there may not even be money in the middle. I've been so obsessed to look at finding out who is paying these people in the Israeli intelligence to destabilize a democracy in Honduras. You can imagine that the options are many, but to find those questions, it's very difficult because we're talking about transnational accounts in tax havens, multiple tax havens. So the program is doing an incredible work because it has to be transnational, multidisciplinary, and with a very critical approach so that we can find these groups. And Ricardo Flores would like to know if you've identified the origin of funds for disinformation of regional organizations such as the Inter-American Development Bank, the BCN. It's an interesting question. I would never have thought of that. I like the question because it wouldn't be out of the question to have them involved, but I don't think it would be direct. Disbursement has go directly to those who receive the money. Because it's not a check on by the World Bank to our committees in Israel. What can happen is if we look at the budget allocations of those monies, if we find a budget allocations for communication, that's where the money would be used from. So this is within communication, political strategies. They are very nebulous classifications and they can be under any heading. I have one more about from Ali Passarelli. CLSC is now, what's the name of the company? It's still registered and active in Washington. What we found, or what Ingi found, was that the members, the leaders, once Facebook banned them, they are now in other corporations created later. We don't know what these other corporations do, but this always happens. Once they're exposed, they erase everything. They do something, they build something new, but they're the same people. So it's really forensic investigation, what I'm showing you about something which is public. Meta and Google have uncovered it, but it's important to understand the nature of these networks that recycle continuously and what are the contacts in each country, because the Israeli company registered its corporation in Honduras to defend the Honduran president. I think what we need to do is to look at the networks. This is something we repeat all the time. This is not original. It's not that they're going to reinvent the wheel. When something works somewhere, they'll try to be more efficient and replicate it. Daniel Villatoro would like to know whether you saw not just political campaigns, but campaigns targeted to hate narratives or racial narratives or gender, not just campaigns targeting candidates, but social issues as well. Yes, thank you, Danny, for the question. And my regards to you, my greetings. I call them digital mercenaries because one day they defend the Lee trousers, and the next day is toothpaste, and then another campaign for Jamate, I already killed in Guatemala. What I've seen is interesting. Some of those who are working for far-right groups, because some just work for these far-right groups and to attack left-wing groups in Latin America, that's very clear. We can see that. They are more consistent, but some are just mercenary. And they do anything. About the intersections, I found many of the right-wing bots that say, well, those that have a lot of money, target and compartment and work in silos, but are the same bots that do Russian propaganda, extreme right propaganda. How do you follow them? With hashtags. When you can use this tool to look at the networks of accounts from a hashtag. This is in 5 countries in Latin America with the same syntax, the same messages. TikTok, there's lots of tools to do data mining in TikTok, more than we know. WhatsApp is my frustration because Meta only talks about Facebook. They don't talk about WhatsApp. And that's a problem because in Latin America, everything goes through WhatsApp. And we need, I think, to understand how it works. But independently from the platform, they are the same people that create the strategy, that design the strategies, and they do these massive campaigns. We have to work a lot to understand who they are and who pays them. It's a big challenge, but we had to start from somewhere, and that's why you're here. You already began because you did not understand that these people were the same and they were popping up everywhere. Cecilia from Chile said, you mentioned a tool to track university degrees, and you said it would be good to look at that. Is there any tool you can tell us about or later? I don't know exactly, but you can write verify college degree. You have to pay, and I can recommend a few, but ideally you should go to the university first. I just did a verification in Ohio State University. And when I'm doing an investigative profile of a person, I look at his thesis, read whatever it is that they wrote for his undergraduate or graduate degrees, because you can start seeing their Weltanschauung. Never doesn't mind if it was very old. They said they studied somewhere. Well, we'll find out if they in fact studied there. So that's the real word for anybody that has a family, also family members. If we're talking about corrupt politicians, make a list of all decision makers who are making the decisions in Venezuela, for example, in Nicaragua and Honduras. There are massive campaigns of disinformation directed by the governments in different regions. And it's more difficult because it's the government itself that does the infrastructure, but contracts have to be paid. So you have to follow that.
And what budgetary allocation was used, who was the person, the name that I gave in Honduras, for example, what assets are being liquidated in Honduras. So following the money doesn't necessarily mean following bank account flows. That would make it easy, but to follow assets in a coherent way to get a better idea of the ecosystem, the big picture. All right. Aldo Benitez asks from Paraguay, what do you do when donor companies or funding companies use the straw men, the what are in Paraguay called the ones who lend their name to head up? Are there methods, or do you have a recommendation if you have to do this sourcing of the front men or the straw men? This is very classic in Latin American investigative journalism. If we're investigating a business, we find a fake company or a phantom company. The probability is that the law firm, the secretary, or the lawyer, in many cases, it might be just somebody who, for a little bit of money, allows them to use their name. When we're looking for a company, we do a mapping of all the contract information from the PO box, the address, the domain, the electronic, the email address, the phone number, because normally they use the same agent, the same phone number, the same address to be able to expand. The idea here is also always to expand the search to find patterns and understand what the behavior is. Perfect. All right. Sandra Donadandel asks, these search mechanisms, may they be used to follow money trails from the 60s in Brazil, or are these only tools that can be used for recent years? Well, the tools that I'm talking about, the logic is for disinformation, but of course you can find almost in any country, much of the records from Brazil and other countries is today digitized. So the logic that we're using is using open source intelligence tools, as well as investigative journalism tools and traditional investigation tools and techniques. I think we're trying to understand who's managing the puppet, if you will. Raizo Uribarri says in his question, is there a database of what you call digital transnational to and the reference would be Cambridge Analytica? No, but that can be done. I gave you the links of Meta and Google, where all of the reports are available by date, not by country, but by date. So do the work use the links and look for reports from 2017 today. I did it for Latin America, and I think there's not a single country that doesn't have at least one report on inauthentic transnational activity that was disbanded, or the Oxford country reports are also there, and also follow very closely, done by the Internet Observatory from Stanford, Grafica, and the other ones that I mentioned. For the digital mercenaries. Another conversation that came up when we were talking before our class and is asked for Jalilaita de Bici is a quick question. All of these detection tools for companies, how do we capture this in journalistic terms, and how do we protect our own security? When we had that first conversation, you suggested that when we work with Investigathon in April, that we do this, maybe not using our own emails. We are expecting that the pitches be undertaken. Let me confess, in my class, we realized we began, 16 people were massively following different companies of this sort. So first, make sure that you are not using LinkedIn on open data. Use a VPN to protect your IP address, as well as, well, those are my two advices. If you use LinkedIn searches, do so in the private mode. And there's an hour of advice on how to hide your own identity when you're doing these searches, because remember that these are companies that are experts in data tracing and in what risk management tell you. If you, we're not talking about physical risk here, I don't think, but this could end up in a physical attack. But these are real digital risks. I think this would be the highest level of digital risk, because these are the bad actors, the experts in being bad actors in the digital space. Well, I would take hours to ask you all the questions, and I'm sure our audience also has many, many questions to ask you, but we're going to run out of time. Let me ask you to stay with us while our audience fills out the survey. They've heard me 10 times repeating this. I think it is important that we get feedback so that we are able to make the necessary tweaks and adjustments for future programs and classes. So if the team will now share either in the chat or on the screen for the survey of Janina's class. Stay with us for just a few more moments. Somebody has offered to work with you on the Israeli society. They have information and they'd like to do that. So they're going to be able to help you and work on that. I think Cristina Roman is also here, who was a student in my class, so that'd be perfect. Renata, would you like to say something on the evaluation?
Well, let's go directly to the assessment. We had a wonderful meeting. And as I said yesterday, I need you to not share any fake news around. So we have the code on the screen, and you can also follow that in the chat. You can fill out the survey, and we're going to analyze it. The feedback that we already received was fantastic. Thank you. So let's go. I have 38 answers so far. There's many of you, and I feel like I'm asking for bids here. We know you're tired.
We know
We
this is the
know
final
we're
stretch. We
close
know you're
to the
tired.
end, but please,
Please
if you may, please
complete.
answer this survey. Answer the
If
survey,
not,
or
I
I
won't be
won't
invited
be
back.
invited
Please
again.
complete this. We want to bring.
We need to bring her back.
We'll invite you anyway because you don't know how many people of the 4 master classes. This is the top slide. I stayed until 1 a.m. looking up all of that information to be able to share it. And that's why we love you. That's so funny. All right.
And that's 100. We got to 100. Let's keep moving.
All right, let's complete a few more. And I've learned so much, so much. I have a list of things now, of possible searches, and I think it was very helpful to hear you at the very end of our master classes, Janina, because this really helps us in terms of methodology and how to get started. Those in our class who have already had an idea, this gives them the tools to get started. Yep, I think that Craig, this is a good complementary presentation to Craig's at the outset. All right, Renata, you have the last word so that I can let Janina go on her way.
Oh, we can let her go 129. We can get to 150 probably, but I will leave you to it. Laura, thank you. Thank you, Janina.
Janina, entonces, muchísimas.
All right, Janina, many thanks. You, there, I want to invite to the stage, if you will, to Patrick Boutrell, who's the Senior Vice President of Content and Community for the International Center for Journalists. And I want Patrick to be the one who closes us out on this excellent series of master classes. And I won't come back after this, but I'll share the same phrase. Remember that collaboration is our most effective tool against disinformation, and transparency is our shield that protects us against mistrust. If you feel alone, know that you are not alone. There are many other people doing similar things, working along similar lines in other places. And if we can light up and make these networks of collaboration stronger and better, more effective. Thank you once again, Janina. Thank you. Patrick, you have the floor. Are you not going to ask me what my favorite food is, Patrick? Asks. Sure. Let me see. I'll ask you. Mountains or beaches? Mountains. For me, mountains. Dogs or cats? I have my dog here. Dogs right here. My dog behind me. All right. I think dogs have won resoundingly. Favorite dish? Favorite food? I love Mexican food, so I think I'll say mole poblano. Preferred or favorite city? It can be a North American city, Central American city, or South American city. I'm going to name a city that I just visited for the first time, which is La Paz. All right, Lima is still winning in our of our speakers. And who's winning the world? Who's going to win the World Cup? You're going to like my answer. You're going to like my answer, Argentina. And that's not just for you. All right. That was the final answer that I expected if we're data journalists. Football is football, but that's what the intel is. Thank you, Janina. Thank you for the class. And I leave you with Patrick Butler.
Lau, you have been such an incredible master of ceremonies for this event. You are a global leader in the fight for truth, and we are so proud to have you as an ICFJ Knight Fellow. Wow, what an amazing 2 days this has been. I am so thrilled to have been able to participate. I want to thank our 4 incredible experts who have taught us so much over the last 2 days: Patricia Campos Melo, Giannina Segnini, Craig Silverman, and Claire Wardle. We are really thrilled that they will continue to work with us on the Investigathon and as mentors for those who are chosen for the reporting grants. A huge thank you, of course, to the Knight Center for Journalism in the Americas for being our partner on this part of the program. It is always such a pleasure to work with my friends Rosenthal and Mallory and all of their team. You guys are wonderful. Thank you also to my colleagues at ICFJ who are responsible for so much of the success of this event. Cristina Tardaguila, our fearless leader, Juan Torres, Renata Salvini, Noah Black, and Maura Hav. You're all wonderful. I'm so thrilled to be able to work with you. You should know that between ICFJ and the Knight Center, we have about 20 people working behind the scenes to make these classes such a success. The interpreters have done a wonderful job. I am so glad that they have allowed us to conduct these master classes in the 3 languages that are so important to the Americas. We are also very, very grateful to the Scripps Howard Foundation for its support for this program. I have been with ICFJ now for more than 20 years, and the Scripps Howard Foundation has been with us for almost all of that time, always doing so much to promote quality journalism in the United States and in other countries. And finally, thanks to all of you who have participated in these master classes. The energy and the passion that I see from all of you is so inspiring. Your participation, your comments, your questions for the speakers have been amazing. And remember that this is just one part of this phase of disarming disinformation. Those of you who have joined these classes are eligible to submit cross-border investigative reporting proposals so that we can put all that we have learned into practice, uncovering the sources of disinformation around the world. The Investigathon, of course, will happen at the Knight Center's ICFJ conference in Austin in April, I believe. This is one of my favorite journalism conferences in the world, so you should definitely try to get there. Stay tuned for more information on how to apply. We will invite you to a Slack channel so you can all be in touch to share ideas. And we hope that this will also help you build your amazing pitches for cross-border projects. And in addition to promoting investigative reporting, this program will work in 5 other verticals, as we're calling them. First, through the ICFJ Pamela Howard Forum on Global Crisis Reporting, we will be holding a global festival in early 2023 called This Is Info. And in that festival, across a range of languages and time zones, experts are going to show you the latest tools to help accurate, truthful information spread virally. You will also learn video and audio techniques, as well as audience engagement strategies, and very much more. Second, ICFJ's research department will lead a comprehensive effort to investigate how disinformation is spreading among audiences in 6 important countries around the world. Next, our International Journalists Network, IJNet.org, will bring the learnings from all of these program verticals to its global audience of hundreds of thousands of people in 8 languages. We will also create a core of trainers in combating disinformation, not only journalists, but also experts who can help us reach the populations that are most vulnerable to believing the lies that are spreading. And finally, we will partner with newsrooms around the world to implement all of this learning from the program. Our overall goal is not just to expose disinformation, but to help journalists and news outlets make concrete improvements in exposing that disinformation and fighting it. Now, to stay informed about all of these events, please register your email in our programs page. The link has been posted in the chat. And once again, thank you to all of you. Gracias, obrigado, for being with us. And as Rosenthal would say, as we battle against disinformation together, let's rock and roll. Thanks, everyone.